I found out my parents called me a freeloader after I paid for their life, so I cut them off. Hey, I'm Alex, and let me tell you, growing up with a golden child sibling is like living in someone else's spotlight all the time. You know the type. There's always that one kid in the family who can do no wrong. For me, that kid was my older brother, Eric. The guy was practically a superhero in my parents' eyes. Star athlete, straight A student, Mr. Popular. You name it, he had it going on. It was always about him. From the time I was little, it was clear who the favorite was. Our house was the place for family get-togethers, and trust me, these weren't small, intimate dinners. Nah, we're talking about big events. Like half the neighborhood showing up, uncles, aunts, cousins, people I barely knew. And somehow these gatherings always turned into Eric appreciation parties. Dad would be flipping burgers on the grill, Mom would be running around making sure everyone had enough food, and there'd be Eric, holding court like a king, with people just hanging on his every word. It's not like I didn't try to fit in, you know? I wanted to be part of it, but somehow it just never worked out. I'd crack a joke and it'd fall flat, or I'd mention something about school, and it was like no one even heard me. I remember one time, this is just a random memory, but it sticks with me. I was about 10, and I got a perfect score on this science test. I was super proud of it. So during one of these family barbecues, I went up to my dad, all excited to show him. But just as I was about to say something, my mom comes running out with this huge cake, and everyone's celebrating Eric winning some soccer tournament. So yeah, my little science test, totally forgotten. That was basically my life in a nutshell. I wasn't a bad kid or anything. In fact, I did pretty well in school. I wasn't out partying or causing trouble, but you wouldn't know it from how little attention I got. Meanwhile, Eric was the family's pride and joy. He had his own shelf for all his trophies and medals, and Mom even made a scrapbook for him, with every single achievement carefully glued in. I didn't have a scrapbook. I didn't even have a shelf. Hell, I'm pretty sure half my stuff was crammed into a box in the attic somewhere, collecting dust. The thing that really got me, though, wasn't even the lack of attention. It was the way people acted like Eric was some kind of god. Like, no joke. At every single family event, someone would bring him up, even if he wasn't there. It's like, oh, did you hear about Eric? He's playing varsity now. Or Eric's got such a bright future ahead of him, I just know he's going to be successful. And I'd be sitting there like, hi? I exist too. The worst part? I started believing it. Like, maybe there really was something wrong with me. Maybe I wasn't worth the attention. I'd sit in my room sometimes just thinking about why I wasn't good enough, even though I was doing everything right. I wasn't failing school. I wasn't getting into trouble. So why wasn't I seen? There was only one person who seemed to get me. Great Aunt Sharon. She wasn't actually all that great in the big important family sense, but to me, she was awesome. Every time there was a family gathering, she'd always take a moment to sit with me. While everyone else was fawning over Eric or caught up in the latest family gossip, she'd pull up a chair and ask me about what I was reading or how school was going. And unlike everyone else, she actually cared about the answer. I remember one time I was hiding in the backyard during one of the big parties. I wasn't feeling it that day and just wanted to escape the noise, so I found a quiet spot behind the garage with a book. Aunt Sharon found me there, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, and instead of dragging me back into the crowd, she sat down beside me. "What are you reading, kiddo?" she asked, her voice calm, like she didn't have anywhere else she'd rather be. I showed her the cover, some fantasy book I'd borrowed from the library. "It's about this kid who finds out he's got these magic powers," I mumbled, half expecting her to lose interest. But she didn't. "Sounds exciting," she said, giving me that warm smile she always had. "You've got a good imagination, Alex. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." That stuck with me. It was the first time in a long while I felt like someone noticed me for who I was, not just Eric's little brother. Aunt Sharon didn't care about soccer trophies or school grades. She just cared about me being me. And honestly, in a family like mine, that meant the world. Still, as much as I loved those quiet moments with Aunt Sharon, they didn't really make up for everything else. Every day felt like a reminder that I wasn't Eric. Like when I started high school, I figured it'd be a fresh start, you know? New teachers, new opportunities. But nope, everyone knew me as Eric's brother. It didn't matter what I did or how well I did it. Every teacher, every coach, every classmate would say the same thing. "Oh, you're Eric's brother. He was such a great student, a great athlete." Even when I made top grades, nobody seemed to care. One time I got an A+ on this massive project in history class. I was pumped. I went home and tried to tell my mom, but she was too busy on the phone with some other soccer mom talking about Eric's latest game. I stood there for a while, waiting for her to hang up, but after like 10 minutes, I just gave up and went to my room. That project got stuffed into my drawer, forgotten like everything else I'd done. The funny thing is, I didn't even want to be Eric. I didn't care about sports or being the most popular guy in school. I just wanted some recognition, you know? Just a little bit of that same pride my parents had for him. But it never came. And the thing is, after a while, you stop expecting it. You start to convince yourself that it's normal, that being overlooked is just how things are supposed to be. That's how I lived my whole childhood, constantly overshadowed, constantly trying to prove I was worth something. It wasn't until years later that I finally realized I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. But back then, I was just a kid, waiting for someone to notice I was there. So high school started, and I had this tiny bit of hope that things would be different. You know, new environment, new people, maybe a chance to finally be seen as my own person instead of just Eric's younger brother. But of course, reality hit pretty quick. It wasn't even the first day when people started connecting the dots. Oh, you're Eric's brother, right? He was like amazing on the soccer team. Yeah, your brother was such a good student. You must be just like him. That last comment really got to me because I wasn't like him, not at all. But people just couldn't help making those comparisons. It was like I was walking around in this shadow that was glued to me no matter where I went. Every single teacher, every single coach, they all had this weird expectation that I'd be just like Eric, like I was supposed to carry on his legacy or something. But that wasn't who I was. I wasn't some sports star, and I definitely wasn't the life of the party. I was the kid who sat in the back of the classroom, taking notes and actually paying attention. I worked hard, studied late, and asked questions after class when I didn't get something. It was important to me that I understood things, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I actually cared. And I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I was doing well, better than anyone expected. There was one time, I remember it clearly during my junior year. I was in biology, and we had this massive project that everyone was stressing out over. The teacher, Mrs. Baker, told us it was going to count for like 40% of our grade for the semester. People were freaking out, and I get it. Biology wasn't exactly everyone's favorite subject, but I actually liked it. I dove into that project like my life depended on it, researching everything I could about cell division and how it affects the body. I spent days in the library, poring over books and articles, and I'm pretty sure I was the only one who actually read the assigned chapters. By the time the project was due, I felt pretty confident. Mrs. Baker called me up after class one day, holding my project in her hand, and I'll never forget what she said. She smiled at me, actually smiled, and said, "Alex, this is excellent work. You really went above and beyond." That little moment meant the world to me. It was probably the first time a teacher had acknowledged me like I wasn't just some kid in the background. I felt proud walking home that day. But of course, when I told my parents about it, they barely reacted. I remember coming home and sitting at the kitchen table with my mom. She was on the phone, as usual, chatting with one of her friends about Eric's latest game. I waited for her to hang up, holding my project in my hands like it was a trophy. When she finally put the phone down, I showed her the grade and told her what Mrs. Baker had said. "Oh, that's nice, honey," she said without even looking at it. Then she went right back to talking about how Eric was getting scouted by some college coach. I just sat there staring at the A plus on my project, feeling like I'd been hit with this invisible wall. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, it never seemed to matter to them. It was always Eric this, Eric that. That kind of stuff happened all the time. Like, there was this other time in history class where we had to write a paper on World War II. I spent hours researching and writing, making sure everything was perfect. I was so proud of how it turned out. The teacher, Mr. Davis, even read part of my paper out loud in class because he thought it was one of the best ones. But when I got home and tried to tell my dad, he just shrugged and said something like, "That's cool, but have you seen Eric's new soccer trophy?" It wasn't just my parents, though. It felt like the whole world was fixated on Eric. Whenever we had family dinners or gatherings, all anyone wanted to talk about was how great he was doing. My grandparents would sit there for hours asking him questions about his games, his future plans, and his scholarships. And when the conversation finally died down, it would shift to something else, like the weather or politics. No one ever asked me about school or how I was doing. At some point, I just stopped trying. I mean, why bother? It was clear that nothing I did would ever compare to Eric's accomplishments in their eyes. I'd come home from school, head straight to my room, and bury myself in my homework or a book. It wasn't like I had much of a social life anyway. While Eric was out with his friends, going to parties or playing in games, I was at home, studying and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. The funny thing is, even though I didn't get much attention at home, I was actually thriving at school. I joined a few clubs, made friends with people who shared the same interests as me, and even started getting recognized by my teachers as one of the top students in my grade. I wasn't some social butterfly, but I found my group, the kids who like to stay after class and talk about books, science, and movies. It was nice to have people who didn't expect me to be anyone other than myself. But even with all that, there was still this lingering feeling that I wasn't good enough. Like, no matter what I achieved, it would never be enough to get the recognition I wanted from my parents. I mean, it's not like I was craving the spotlight or anything, but a little acknowledgement would have been nice. Just once, I wanted to hear them say they were proud of me for something I'd done, not because I was Eric's sibling, but because I was me. I guess the turning point came during senior year, when I was applying to colleges. I'd worked my butt off for years, getting good grades, participating in clubs, and trying to build a solid application. I applied to a few schools, and one day I got the letter: acceptance into a business program at State University. I was thrilled. I ran home, excited to tell my parents the good news. But when I walked in the door and announced that I'd been accepted, their reaction was underwhelming, to say the least. "Oh, that's nice, Alex," my mom said, barely looking up from her magazine. "Cool," my dad muttered, scrolling through his phone. "What about Eric? Did he get in anywhere?" That was it. That was the moment I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, they were never going to see me the way I wanted them to. I wasn't Eric, and that meant I didn't matter as much in their eyes. It hurt, but it also lit a fire in me. If they weren't going to believe in me, I was going to prove them wrong, one way or another. So, after that whole thing with getting into State University, I pretty much accepted that my parents weren't ever going to care about my accomplishments the way they did with Eric. I tried not to dwell on it too much, but it still stung. I mean, it's hard not to feel it when you're working your butt off and the people who are supposed to care the most barely even notice. Anyway, I'd been accepted into the business program, which was a big deal for me. I was pumped, but the reality of paying for it was creeping up fast. With no help from my parents, I was basically on my own. I'd been applying for scholarships, grants, and anything else that could help cover the costs, but it wasn't enough. That's when Aunt Sharon stepped in. I wasn't expecting it at all. One afternoon, I was hanging out at her place, helping her with some stuff around the house. Aunt Sharon lived in this cozy little house that always smelled like fresh bread or cookies, way better than the chaos at my parents' house. We were sitting in her kitchen, and out of nowhere, she asked me how things were going with college. I tried to shrug it off, like I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. "Yeah, I got accepted, but I'm not sure how I'm going to pay for it. It's kind of up in the air right now." Aunt Sharon put down the dish she was washing and turned to look at me. "Alex, I know your parents haven't been much help, but you're smart, and you've worked hard to get where you are. You shouldn't have to give up on your dreams because of money." I didn't say anything at first. I mean, what could I say? She wasn't wrong, but I had already resigned myself to the fact that I might have to delay college or work full-time just to save up. It was just one of those things I thought I'd have to deal with. Then Aunt Sharon said something that completely floored me. "I've got some savings," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I've been putting money away for years, and I'd like to give it to you for your tuition." I just stared at her for a minute, my brain trying to catch up with what she was saying. "Wait, what? You want to help me pay for school?" I couldn't believe it. No one had ever offered to help me like that before. She smiled and nodded. "I don't have any kids of my own, and I've always seen you as my own. You've got so much potential, Alex. You deserve to go to college and make something of yourself. And I'm not going to let money be the thing that stops you." I swear I almost started crying right there in her kitchen. It was like all the weight I'd been carrying around, the pressure of figuring everything out on my own, just lifted. I didn't even know how to thank her. I just hugged her tight and tried not to lose it. Aunt Sharon's offer changed everything. Suddenly, college wasn't just a distant dream, it was happening. I spent the next few weeks getting everything in order, applying for student housing, signing up for classes, and preparing for this huge new chapter in my life. And the whole time, Aunt Sharon was there, supporting me in ways I didn't even know I needed. But of course, my parents had no idea about any of this. I hadn't told them about Aunt Sharon's offer because, honestly, I didn't think they'd care. They were too busy with Eric's latest achievements to even ask me about my plans. It wasn't until one evening, a couple of weeks before I was set to leave for college, that they finally brought it up. We were sitting around the dinner table, me, my parents, and Eric. The usual chatter about his soccer games and college applications was in full swing when my mom suddenly turned to me. "So, Alex, what are you planning to do after graduation?" she asked, like it was the first time she'd thought about it. I almost laughed. "I'm going to college," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "I got accepted into the business program at State University." For a split second, the room went quiet. My dad put down his fork and raised an eyebrow. And how exactly are you planning on paying for that? This was it. The moment I'd been dreading. I took a deep breath. Aunt Sharon is helping me. She's giving me her savings for my tuition. My parents' reactions were exactly what I expected. My mom's eyes went wide with shock, and my dad's face twisted into this weird combination of surprise and anger. Sharon's giving you money? My dad said, his voice sharp. That's ridiculous. If she has money to spare, it should go to Eric. He needs a new car for college. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They didn't even care that I was finally getting my shot at something. They were more concerned about Eric needing a car. I felt this wave of frustration rise up in me, but I tried to stay calm. This isn't about Eric, I said, my voice tight. Aunt Sharon wants to help me. She offered, and I'm not turning it down. Mom, of course, tried to guilt trip me. But your brother needs that money, Alex. You know how important his future is. I couldn't take it anymore. I'm important too, I snapped, louder than I intended. This is my future we're talking about. I've worked hard for this, and Aunt Sharon believes in me. Why can't you guys? The silence that followed was deafening. My parents just stared at me, completely caught off guard by my outburst. Eric, for once, didn't say anything. He just sat there, looking uncomfortable. I didn't care, though. I'd had enough of being ignored, enough of being the second thought. I'm going to college, I repeated, quieter this time, but just as firm. With or without your support. I pushed my chair back and left the table. I didn't need their approval anymore. For the first time in my life, I had someone in my corner who believed in me, Aunt Sharon. And that was enough. The next few weeks were a blur. I packed up my things, said goodbye to the few friends I had in town, and got ready for the big move. I still hadn't told my parents much about my plans, and honestly, I didn't feel like I owed them any explanations. This was my time to finally step out of Eric's shadow and make something of myself. When the day came to leave, Aunt Sharon drove me to campus. As we pulled up to the dorms, I felt this overwhelming mix of nerves and excitement. It was the start of something completely new, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me. As I hugged Aunt Sharon goodbye, I couldn't help but feel grateful. She'd given me the chance I needed, and I wasn't going to waste it. Starting college felt like stepping into a whole new world. I'd never really been away from home for that long, and now I was suddenly surrounded by people my age, all living on their own for the first time. It was exciting, but at the same time, a little overwhelming. When Aunt Sharon dropped me off, I remember standing outside my dorm building, looking at the huge campus in front of me, feeling like I'd finally made it. The first week was a blur of orientations, meeting new people, and trying to get the hang of things. I wasn't exactly the most outgoing person, so I was a bit nervous about making friends. But surprisingly, it wasn't as hard as I thought. Everyone was in the same boat, new place, new faces, so it was easy to strike up conversations in the dining hall or between classes. My roommate Jake was one of those super chill guys who somehow managed to be friends with everyone. He had this laid-back vibe and always seemed to know what was going on around campus. I didn't know it at the time, but having him as a roommate would end up being one of the best things that happened to me during those early days. He was the type of person who would introduce me to everyone, and before I knew it, I had a solid group of friends. But as much as the social part of college was important, I was still there to get a degree. I was determined not to let anything distract me from that. I didn't come all this way just to slack off. The first day of classes, I showed up early, sat in the front row, and took notes like my life depended on it. The professors were intimidating at first, way different from high school teachers, but they seemed to appreciate the effort I was putting in. There was one professor, Dr. Collins, who taught my intro to business class. He was this older guy with a thick beard and a voice that could command an entire lecture hall without a microphone. I remember the first time I raised my hand to ask a question, my heart was pounding. But instead of brushing me off or giving a short answer, Dr. Collins smiled and said, "Good question, Alex," and then went on to explain it in detail. That one small moment was a big deal to me. It felt like validation, like I wasn't just another face in the crowd. That class quickly became my favorite. It wasn't just the subject. I mean, business was what I came here to study. But it was the way Dr. Collins made everything click. He had this way of turning what seemed like complicated concepts into something I could actually wrap my head around. I'd go back to my dorm every day and reread my notes, making sure I understood everything. Jake thought I was a little too intense about it sometimes, but honestly, I didn't care. This was my shot, and I wasn't going to waste it. Speaking of Jake, I have to give the guy credit. He was one of those people who could breeze through classes without really trying, but he never made me feel bad for taking things seriously. He'd joke around about how I was teacher's pet, but it was all in good fun. And when he saw me stressing out about an assignment or a test, he'd actually sit down with me and help me relax a bit. Dude, it's college, he'd say, tossing a ball of crumpled up paper at me from across the room. You're supposed to have fun. Don't burn yourself out before midterms. He had a point, but I couldn't help it. There was a lot riding on this for me. This wasn't just about getting a degree. It was about proving to myself that I was more than just the forgotten sibling. Every time I sat down to study or work on a project, it felt like I was pushing back against all the years of being overlooked. I wasn't doing it for my parents or even for Aunt Sharon. I was doing it for me. Still, I did try to loosen up a bit. Jake dragged me out to a few campus events. Nothing too crazy, just stuff like movie nights or hanging out with some people from the dorm. I'll admit, it was nice to step away from the books for a bit and actually enjoy being at college. I started feeling like I belonged there, like I was part of something bigger than just my little world of lectures and textbooks. One of the biggest surprises, though, came from a class project. Dr. Collins had assigned us a group project where we had to come up with a business idea and present it to the class. Group projects weren't really my thing. I'd always been the kid who ended up doing all the work while everyone else slacked off. But this time it was different. My group was made up of 3 other students, Jess, Tyler, and Marcus. Jess was super organized, Tyler was this tech genius, and Marcus had a way with words that made him perfect for presentations. For once, I wasn't the only one pulling my weight. We worked really well together, bouncing ideas off each other and actually listening to each other's input. By the time we presented our idea, a campus delivery service for late-night snacks, we were all feeling pretty confident. The day of the presentation, I was nervous as hell. Public speaking wasn't my strong suit, but I'd practiced my part over and over until I could recite it in my sleep. When we got up there, though, everything clicked. Jess nailed the intro, Tyler's tech demo worked perfectly, and Marcus wrapped it all up with this killer closing statement. I did my part without stumbling, and when we finished, the class actually clapped. Dr. Collins gave us a nod of approval, and I swear, it felt like winning the lottery. That project ended up being a turning point for me. Not only did we get an A, but it also made me realize that I was capable of more than I thought. I wasn't just the quiet kid in the background anymore. I was part of a team, and I'd contributed something meaningful. It was a huge confidence boost, and it pushed me to keep going, to keep pushing myself out of my comfort zone. By the end of that first semester, I felt like I was finally hitting my stride. I wasn't just surviving college, I was thriving. Sure, there were still moments where I doubted myself, and yeah, I missed Aunt Sharon and the comfort of her house sometimes, but I was building something here, something that was mine. I guess what I'm trying to say is, college was more than just classes and grades for me. It was the first time I felt like I had control over my life, like I was the one deciding who I was going to be. And even though there were still challenges ahead, I knew I could handle it. For the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. So, after college, I did what any recent graduate does. I found a job. It wasn't anything flashy, but it was steady, and I was grateful for it. It gave me the chance to save up and figure out what I wanted to do next. I knew from the start that working for someone else wasn't going to cut it for me long term. I had bigger plans. That's when the idea of opening my own restaurant started brewing in my head. I've always loved cooking, and the idea of running my own place just felt right. I kept thinking about what it would be like to have my own spot, where people would come in for good food and a welcoming atmosphere. After a couple of years of working and saving, I finally took the leap. I opened my first restaurant in a small but busy part of town. It wasn't anything fancy at first, just a cozy little place with a simple menu. But people started coming, and before I knew it, the business was taking off. Running a restaurant isn't easy, though. Those first few months were insane. I barely had time to breathe between managing the kitchen, serving customers, and handling all the behind-the-scenes stuff. But despite the long hours and stress, I loved it. It felt like I was finally doing something that was mine, something I built from the ground up. And when it started getting popular, that was just the icing on the cake. As the restaurant grew, I took the next big step, opening another branch. It felt like a dream. I never imagined I'd have more than one place, but there I was, expanding the business and watching it thrive. Eventually, I had a few locations around town, and things were going better than I could have hoped for. I had a solid team of employees, and the restaurants were making a good profit. Life was pretty good. And then, as if on cue, my parents came back into the picture. It started with a phone call from my mom. I hadn't heard much from her or my dad in a while, not since I'd gone off to college. We'd been keeping our distance, which honestly was fine by me. But suddenly there they were, back again, asking for a favor. Alex, sweetie, how are you doing? It's been so long, Mom said, her voice all sweet and full of fake enthusiasm. I could tell something was up immediately. I'm fine, Mom. Busy with the restaurants, I replied, keeping it short. I knew there was more to this call than just a friendly check-in. Well, we're so proud of you. You know that, right? She said, her voice edging toward what I could only describe as desperation. But, um, we were wondering if you could do us a little favor? It's about Eric. Of course, it was about Eric. It's always about Eric. I let her continue, even though I already had a good idea of where this was going. You know, he's been struggling to find work lately. He's applied everywhere, but no one's hiring him, she explained. He's had some issues at his last few jobs, and now it's like no one will give him a chance. We were hoping maybe you could help him out. Give him a job at one of your restaurants? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Eric, the golden child who could do no wrong, had apparently messed up so many times that even his charm couldn't land him a job anymore. Part of me wanted to say no, to remind them of all the times they put Eric on a pedestal while ignoring everything I did, but I knew that wasn't going to help anyone. So against my better judgment, I agreed. Fine, Mom. I can give him a job, I said, my voice a little more tired than I wanted it to be. But he's going to have to work as a waiter. No special treatment. He needs to actually do the job. Oh, thank you, Alex. You don't know how much this means to us, she gushed, like I'd just saved the world. He'll be so grateful. Grateful? Eric? Yeah, right. When Eric showed up to start work, it was awkward, to say the least. He acted like he was doing me a favor by being there. Like I should be grateful for him gracing my restaurant with his presence. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, giving him a job when no one else would hire him, and he acted like he was above it. But I kept my cool and treated him like any other employee. Surprisingly, he didn't do a terrible job. He wasn't great either, but he showed up, did what was required, and didn't cause too many issues. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than I expected. Things stayed pretty calm for a while after that, but then my parents called again. This time the favor was even bigger. Alex, we need to talk, my dad said, sounding more serious than usual. We're in some financial trouble and we need your help. Of course they were. Apparently they had blown through all their savings. Between Eric's endless adventures, his failed business ideas, the college he never finished, and whatever other nonsense he got into, they had nothing left. They'd spent it all, and now they were looking to me to bail them out. At this point, I should have been used to it. I should have known that they'd come to me eventually, especially after years of pouring everything into Eric. But it still hurt. It still felt like they were only coming to me because they had no other option, not because they actually valued me or cared about what I'd achieved. I could have said no. I could have told them to figure it out on their own, that I wasn't their safety net. But for some reason, I didn't. Maybe part of me still wanted to help, even after everything. Or maybe I just didn't want to see them completely fall apart. So, once again, I agreed. I started sending them a monthly allowance, just enough to help them get by. I wasn't going to cover all of their expenses, but I didn't want them to lose their home, or be out on the street either. It felt like the right thing to do, even though it left a bitter taste in my mouth. And of course, there was Eric still working at the restaurant, still getting by without any real consequences for the messes he'd made. My parents didn't ask him to contribute or to help them out. They just let him keep doing his thing, while I was the one stepping up, as always. In the end, I couldn't help but wonder how things had turned out this way. I'd built something real, something successful, and yet here I was, still cleaning up after the golden child, still giving my parents the help they needed because they'd blown everything on him. But for now, it was what it was. At least I had my restaurants, my business. I'd created something that was mine, and no one could take that away from me. One afternoon, I was at the restaurant going over some invoices and prepping for the upcoming week. It was a normal day, busy, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then my phone rang. It was Aunt Sharon. Now, Aunt Sharon doesn't call me much unless there's something important, so right away I knew something was up. Hey, Aunt Sharon, I said, trying to keep my voice light, even though I was already bracing myself for whatever news she had. Alex, sweetie, you need to see this video, she said, her voice serious. It's from a family party your parents were at last weekend. Someone posted it online and, well, I think you should take a look. My stomach dropped. A video? Of my parents? It didn't sound good. What's it about? I asked, trying to get a sense of what I was walking into. Just watch it. I'm sending you the link right now. Call me after, she said, sounding almost hesitant, like she wasn't sure how I'd react. I opened the link Aunt Sharon sent, and the first thing I saw was my parents, clearly drunk, holding drinks and swaying slightly as they stood in front of a group of people. There was loud music in the background, and the camera was shaky, but I could hear every word they were saying. My mom started talking first. You know, everyone thinks Alex built those restaurants on their own, but really it was all Eric, she slurred, waving her hand dramatically. Eric's the real genius behind it all. He's the one who gave Alex that nice job. He works so hard, running around all day making sure everything's perfect while Alex just sits back and manages things. I blinked, not sure if I'd heard that right. Did she really just say Eric was the one who gave me a job? Eric, who couldn't hold down a job anywhere else, was supposedly the mastermind behind my restaurant business? I was so stunned I almost paused the video, but then my dad chimed in. And you know what else? My dad said, his face flushed and his words slurred. We gave Alex money to start those restaurants. We helped them get off the ground. But does Alex ever thank us? No, ungrateful little freeloader. He practically spat the last word, his face twisting in disgust. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These were my parents, my own parents, standing there at a family party, drunk out of their minds, telling everyone that I was a freeloader, that I'd only made it because of Eric and their supposed financial help. I felt my blood boiling. The restaurant was mine. I'd built it from scratch. Me, not Eric, not them. They hadn't given me a dime. And now they were standing there, rewriting history like I was some useless leech riding on their coattails. As the video continued, my mom rambled on about how Eric was so humble and didn't take credit for everything he did for me. He could have opened his own business, you know, she said with a slurred giggle. But he's too kind. He just wants to help Alex succeed. That's the kind of brother he is. I felt sick. Eric, who could barely manage to be a waiter, was now apparently the brains behind my entire business, and they were acting like he was some kind of saint for letting me run the restaurants while he quietly did all the real work. It was beyond absurd. It was insulting. It was a flat-out lie. By the time the video ended, my hands were shaking with anger. I couldn't believe they'd do this, talking behind my back, making me look like a joke in front of the whole family, and they didn't even think twice about it, like it was just some casual conversation, like it wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal. I'd worked my entire life to get to where I was. I'd busted my ass to make something of myself, while Eric had screwed up every opportunity he'd ever had. And now, after everything, they were giving him the credit and calling me the freeloader? I couldn't let this slide. I grabbed my phone and called my parents, my heart pounding as the phone rang. My mom answered, sounding cheerful, like nothing was wrong. Alex, how are you, sweetie? I didn't bother with small talk. I saw the video, I said, my voice cold and shaking with barely contained anger. There was a pause on the other end, and I could practically hear her scrambling to come up with a response. What video? She asked, her voice suddenly wary. The one from the party, I snapped. The one where you and Dad are telling everyone that I'm a freeloader and that Eric is the real reason I've been successful. Oh, that, she said, trying to laugh it off. Alex, you know we were just joking. It was all in good fun. We'd had a few drinks and... You called me a freeloader, I cut her off, my voice rising. You said Eric was the one who gave me a job, that you gave me money to start the restaurants. Do you realize how insulting that is? I built this business on my own without any help from you or Eric, and you're standing there telling people it's all because of him? She started to stammer, but I didn't give her a chance to continue. I've had enough, I said, my voice hard. I'm done with this. I'm done with the lies, the manipulation, all of it. Don't call me. Don't ask me for anything. You're cut off, for good. Alex, wait, we didn't mean... She tried to say, but I hung up before she could finish. I sat there for a minute, my phone still in my hand, trying to process what had just happened. I'd always known my relationship with my parents was messed up, but this? This was the final straw. They had crossed a line that I couldn't forgive. Aunt Sharon called me later that day to check in. I'm so sorry you had to see that, Alex, she said, her voice full of sympathy. I don't know what they were thinking. They weren't, I replied, feeling drained. But it doesn't matter anymore. I'm done with them. After I hung up with Aunt Sharon, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't weighed down by the constant pressure to make my parents happy, to live up to their impossible expectations, or to clean up their messes. I was free. I'd made my own success, and I didn't owe them a thing.